format for a course, so I'm assuming you cover that category as well. The different types of plugin types. Alright, well, it looks like I'm a bit of scrutiny right now. Alright, so the plugin types, you can have the blocks, which pretty much they sit on the side of your courses, on the side of your Moodle site. The modules that you can add to different courses, so an activity or a resource. Reports that administrators can use to view statistics. Local plugins, which are just introduced into Moodle 2, which is what I will be doing today, or what we'll hope to create by the end today. Course formats, which, yes, as Gareth stated, the collapsed topics, that comes under course formats. Themes, sub-plugins, so some plugins even allow sub-plugins, so the assignment module type has sub-plugins as well. What do they all have in common? I'm thinking maybe I should skip all this since you probably all know this, but just let me know if you want to go further ahead. So for a plugin, you have the ability to install database tables, define new Moodle capabilities, declare strings, keep track of the version that you're using, and manage any upgrades that you might need to do for your code later on. So the upgrades come into it when, say, you release some code to the public and then you realize that you wanted to add new database columns to the database table, then you create an upgrade script that added these columns. Alright, so plugins, they all have kind of a similar structure. As you can see here, I suggest you guys probably put this on full screen so you can see the pictures with more clarity. There's a backup folder, and you can see that in the naming conventions between a block and a module, there's not much difference. You can see that with the module, it just has backup underscore the module name and then underscore activity underscore task. Whereas instead of using activity underscore task, the block uses block underscore task. They both share the same characteristics in the database folder. There's the access.php file. This file controls capabilities that Moodle uses to install. So for your plugin, you might want to create a capability and only assign that to certain users. And this capability might not fall under any of the capabilities that are currently present in Moodle. So in this case, you would actually want to create your own one. What you do? Alright, okay, Don was just showing me that that's the pointer. So I was talking about the access.php file. The install.xml file, that is on installation of the module. They're the database tables that will be installed. This is where you define all the characteristics of the table. Again, I'll be going into this later on the presentation. And I'll actually end up going through the process of creating an install.xml file. Here you'll see the language folder. This is where you'll declare any new strings that you wish that aren't actually present in the current Moodle installation. So this is where this actually becomes handy as well if you have a plugin that can have multiple languages. So you can have the lang/en folder. The en represents the language that you'll be using. So in this case, it's English. You can actually have multiple folder names and have people from the community collaborate and add their own language files, so then that your plugin can actually work on multiple sites. In the block, there always has to be a block underscore blockname.php file. In this file, there has to be an add instance and delete instance function. Now, again, Moodle has different APIs depending on which module that you'll be programming. So in this case, the block, that file is actually necessary. If you look at the module, the mod form, this file over here is the one that is necessary. Moodle looks for that when you're adding a module, and then that form is where all the elements are defined when you're actually creating that module. So the text area, the select boxes, basically all the characteristics. Another thing they share in common is the version.php file that keeps track of the current version, and also many other characteristics such as the Moodle version that it requires to work. Again, I'll go into this later. Alright, so I don't know if you guys have seen this picture before. It goes around meme sites. I don't know if you guys follow memes, but just means let's get on with it. So the plugin that we're going to be doing today is a local plugin. We're going to basically allow students to record notes for any courses they are enrolled in. Yes, that's right, Gareth. In the module, if you look over there, it's actually mod_form.php. That's declared for all modules. So it's not actually mod underscore the module name. It's actually mod, and that's, you'll find that throughout all the everything that's in the mod folder. Again, a lot of this is, to figure this out, is looking at the current modules that are already present in Moodle. You can just copy and see how they do things and just learn from there. That's, you know, the great thing about Moodle being open source. You can actually look at the code that's present and try to follow that. Yes, that's correct, Michael. So that is the file that is used when you're adding a module that declares all the form elements that you'll be using. Alright, so this local plugin, what are we going to need to create this? Basically, we're going to need to create a database table that stores the user notes. So in this table, we're going to need a user ID, a course ID, and just a note field. We're also going to need, well, we don't need to. In this case, we could just simply use the Moodle API to retrieve the courses that the student is enrolled in. But in this case, I did want to demonstrate how a capability can be curated and used. So I am going ahead and just going to create my own capability for this plugin. Now, how are users going to access this? Well, we want to create a menu link. So basically, just a link that they click on brings them to a page, and that's where they'll be able to access this plugin. The great thing about local plugins, they don't actually have to sit anywhere. You can actually not display it at all and just have the PHP pages and just give people a direct link to it. It's not even necessary to add a link. Unlike a block or a module where you'll find them in the drop-down box in a course or in a block on the side of the site, this is actually hidden and doesn't actually have to be shown at all. So, okay, this is basically what our structure is going to look like. We're going to have a course notes in the local folder. We're going to have a course notes folder. Now that is going to be the name of our plugin. We are going to have a folder called DB. In this, we're going to have the access.php file, which is where the capabilities are created, an install.xml file, which lists all the database tables, the language file, the notes.php. Now, this is just the file name that I've decided to create, which is going to be the page that people access this module on. This isn't actually a necessary name, a necessary file for this plugin. The settings.php, that file is used to create the menu structure. So it's going to add the menu item. The version.php, that basically, like I stated before, just keeps track of the version of the module. So as I said, I'll just go past this. The capability we're going to add is called local/course notes add. The capability, this is us declaring it. So basically, this is the structure that all capabilities take. It's basically, the capabilities is an array of multiple capabilities. You can actually have, in this case, there's only one capability defined in this file, but you can have as many as you wanted. I've decided to go with just a simple capability called add. So the standard for creating the capability is the plugin type / the name of the plugin, then the name of the capability that you are going to declare. This is where, as you can see, that is the name of the plugin, and that's the capability. The cap type, there's multiple cap types that you can use. In this case, we're going to allow the user to write to the database. So other cap types include read. So if this module was simply displaying information to the user, like what type of courses they were enrolled in, but didn't actually do any writes, then that's when you would use read. Here's the context level. This is basically where the plugin is going to lie. So at what context does the user need this capability? Now, because I'm creating the link in the site administration menu, I decided to make this a context system. yes, as Michael stated, you can if they are defined elsewhere. So the archetypes, these basically are the roles that we want to, when this plugin is installed, we want to grant these people the privilege. These people, these users who have these roles, these privileges. Now we want them to automatically have the allow. And this means that when we install the capability, there's no need to go back into the roles and then start allowing certain users this capability. It will automatically happen during the installation. Yep, so I'm just basically explain that. So how do we go about creating this file? Now Moodle has an inbuilt XMLDB editor. Now rather than having to write the XML yourself, which can kind of get a bit confusing and you can start tearing your hair out because you're missing the previous, the next statements on a certain field, which I'll show you later. This handles that all for you. Now it's under the developer and the site administration. You will see there's a link called XMLDB editor which you can click on. Here, now as I've stated here, you have to ensure that the web service can actually write to this file, because when we're making changes here, we actually want to save this to the file. So the web server needs to be able to make those changes. So of course we're going to have to grant that privilege. So once you click load and edit, once you click load, the page will reload again, and then you'll click to edit. Okay, so now as I discussed, this is what our table structure is going to be. A user ID, course ID, and note. Well, that's pretty simple. User ID is just going to be a foreign key, which refers to the user table. And this is going to refer to the column ID. The course ID refers to the Moodle course table, and that refers to the ID in that table. Note is going to be the note, what does the student want to say about this course? So once we're in the XMLDB editor, you'll be greeted with this screen. This will list the path to the installed XML file, and this will be where you'll leave any comment. Now these aren't really necessary. This is just for your own interest. It's better for a developer if they're going to look through the installed XML file to have some sort of comment that makes some sense. Now Moodle automatically will have the install.xml a table, and this table is going to be called change me. As the name suggests, you're going to have to change this. So here's where you click on to edit this. Now when you go through, you will be able to choose the table name, a comment about the table, fields, and keys. Now here you'll be able to see that you can add these links at the top here is basically where you choose what you want to do. So you want to add a new field or a new key. So first we'll start with just adding a new field to this table. Well, all the three fields. This is the screen that will pop up. You'll get a nice GUI interface where you choose what type of field this is going to be. Now the user ID is going to be an integer of length 10. This just follows normal standard Moodle convention and is the same data type that the user table uses in Moodle. You'll see the course ID is also the same. And unsigned, okay, so basically all the integers in Moodle anything that relates to a primary key is going to be unsigned. Unsigned is basically, is the integer going to be negative? So in this case, it's not going to be negative. So we're going to choose unsigned. We don't ever want to insert a null value either. So, oh Gareth, I did not know that, so okay, forget I said any of that. Another field, and this is the note field. Basically this is going to be a text area, a text field, and it's going to be large. We're going to let the student add as much as they want to this. Basically this can also be null. Adding the keys. So here, I should probably make this full screen because I can actually see the pictures myself. Here we have the keys. So we're going to have the user key and the course key. This name does not actually have to reflect the name of the actual column. Sorry, Dom was just fiddling around with something. So this type is user as a foreign. So the field in our table, what we have called it is the user ID. It refers to the Moodle user table and the ID column in that table. This is the same with the course. It's also a foreign key. The name of the field in our table is course ID. The table we're referring to is the Moodle table course, and the ref field is ID. Now you may notice that this table doesn't actually have MDL underscore associated. That's because that's the prefix, and that's defined in the config.php file. Each Moodle site has a different prefix, so this will automatically be prepended to this field, so it's not necessary to include that here. Once we have that done, we'll have a setup screen as such, and we can simply click Save. That will write to the install.xml file, and this is basically an example of what it will look like. Here you'll see we have the fields and the keys. Each field declares what is next after it. So this is when I said that it was kind of confusing when you're doing the install.xml file yourself, because sometimes if you try to go through the install process, it will say that a previous or next value was incorrect. So the this XMLDB generator that Moodle has inbuilt will automatically define all these. It also has what we've already gone through with the unsigned, the length, and the type. Alright, so the language file. This is where we define any custom strings that are used. As I said earlier, it's possible to have multiple languages. It also allows users to go through and change any language that they're not happy with. Because the plugin writer might not necessarily have the best English, so they will write something that is straight to the point and not necessarily worded that well, or worded so that a user would understand it. So you can go through the language customization page, which is a separate setting in Moodle, and edit the language files like this. So that's why it's never recommended to hard-code language or hard-code a string in your plugins. Alright, so the language strings. Here we have two strings. The menu option, which is basically, that is going to be the string that is displayed on the menu, as the name implies. I'm just going to call it course notes, the same as the plugin name. The plugin name is something that is required, or, well, not required, but it avoids you receiving an issue with this string not being found. When you are installing plugins, Moodle will search in the language file for a string with this name. It will then, so when you go through the plugin installation, this is the name the plugin will be given. Alright, so the settings.php file. This is different for each plugin. You can do different things in this page. For a local plugin, this is where we're actually going to define where the local plugin sits, or where the menu item sits. So as you can see here, we are adding to the global variable admin, we're adding a new category. All these things here are categories. So here's the one that we're adding. We're adding one, course notes. Now we just want to give it a unique name, so I simply called it local_course notes. You can call it whatever you want, but this will just easy to remember. Here I'm just going to use the name of the plugin here, but here again you can declare more strings that you want to use. You can declare any string you would like to display for this category name. Now, for this category element, we are now going to add a page. Now, the page, we're just going to give it the name course notes. That's the internal name. The name we're actually going to display is the menu option. That is the string that I just declared previously in the language file. This is the link that page is going to go to, and this is the capability required to see this link. So this link will actually not show if this capability is not present for the user who is viewing this site administration block. So the version.php file. So I'm just looking through. Are there any questions so far? It looks like Michael's been pretty good at answering them all. So I'll just continue. Just keep writing more questions and I'll pay more attention to the chat. So the version.php file, mainly that will keep track of what version of the plugin are we on? What version of Moodle is required to run it? What Moodle component is this? What maturity is this plugin? And how often do we want to run the cron job? Here is our file. Now the version, that is just today's date, and that's the release, so the first release. As you can see, the dates work, the year, the month, and then the day. This requires, I simply went to my Moodle 2 install on my computer and looked at the version.php file that was using and just grabbed that. So this was going to require Moodle 2 onwards to work. The component is a local plugin called Course Notes, and the maturity is maturity stable. Probably in this case, maybe it should be called maturity alpha, considering I just wrote it a few hours ago and it hasn't really been tested that well. But let's just say it's stable. And the cron job, this number here represents how often do we want the cron to run. The cron is a process that Moodle uses in the background. It runs every 10 minutes on most servers. Each plugin can define what happens during the cron job. So for our example, it could be that we want notes that are 30 days old to be deleted. This is where we would write this functionality in the cron. The 0 simply means that there is no time limit. Run it every time the Moodle cron has been run. So here we go. The plugin is now ready to install. You'll see this is the plugin name that is using the string plugin name in the language file that we created earlier. We can just go through with the upgrade. So far, looking good. Alright, so now here's where we start some of the code. This is the notes.php file. This is where all the logic is going to be handled. Here we're going to require once. We are just going to require, just to obtain Moodle's functionality, we're just going to have to require the config.php file. This is standard for most files that are used throughout Moodle that are using any of the Moodle API. So these are just common things that you often be writing a lot when creating your own plugins. We are also going to be adding a form, well, two forms in fact, which I'll go into later. So we are going to be creating a notes_forms.php file, which will contain these two classes. So here I'm just going to require them. We are in the context of system. This is just defined in the capabilities. This function here, require login, that simply checks to see if the user, as the name states, has been logged in or not. If they haven't, they'll just be taken to the login page. The require capability. This will throw an error if the user does not meet this capability. This is the capability that we defined earlier. Now, this notes.php file is going to receive an ID. This ID is going to be of the course that the user is wanting to add a note to. So this is going to be an optional parameter. The reason for this is because when they first access that page, they won't be passing an ID. They will simply be greeted with a drop-down box, where they can actually choose the course they want to use. Here, if they have passed an ID, we want to do a validation check. This if statement is present throughout all of Moodle files. I simply just took it from there. So basically, it checks to see if the course exists. If it doesn't, it prints an error, and it just uses a predefined error string that has already been declared in Moodle. Here, we set the URL for the page. If the ID has been passed, then the set URL function takes an array of parameters. If it hasn't, then we're simply just going to call this. This set URL function allows it so that when you're visiting this page, the menu item to the left that displays this link will still be highlighted. Rather than the drop-down menu disappearing, this will still be present and bold. So you will know by looking at that menu that you are on this page. We're just going to use the set page layout. This layout is defined in your themes. I've just decided to go with the administrator layout. You can choose by default if you don't specify anything here. I believe it uses the base layout. It's best to just go to your theme and see what the different layouts are and just mess around with them if you want. We're going to set the context. This is so when Moodle generates the page, it knows what context it's at. And we're going to set the title. The title here is basically the browser title, so the tab, what is going to be displayed on the tab. And here, these are simply two functions, one that displays the header, one that displays the footer. These are defined, these are standard Moodle functions and are defined. Your theme is really what takes control of how these appear. The one thing when developing plugins, you don't need to worry too much about the look of the plugin. You know that you can rely on the theme. So when you simply echo out these two, the header and the footer, you know that depending on the theme, the page is going to generate just as the user expected. Alright, so this is an error message. What's happened here? I didn't have the permission, the capability that we just created. So what I've done is I've added the capability to the language string. Now this is the same with all plugins. When you're creating a capability, you're going to have to add it to the language string in order for these messages to make sense. This language file is also used when you're going through and defining a role and looking through the list of capabilities. And a little explanation below each capability will be shown, and this is what will be shown to them. So now that we've added that, I'm going to refresh the page, and the error message now makes more sense. Alright, the forms. There's going to be two forms for this. One to search the notes, so what are the notes for each course that we have, and another form to add the note. The first form is simply going to be a drop-down box with the courses the user is enrolled in. The second one is going to be a text box where the user can add their note and click submit. So creating the forms. Here I've added the notes underscore forms.php file. This is basically Moodle folder is a convention where, just to keep it simple and just to know what file is associated with another file without having to go into the code. Here you can see simply by the naming structure that this notes underscore forms belongs to the notes.php. Well, not belongs to, but is used by. These forms are used on that page. Alright, so this is the notes underscore forms.php page. Here we've got two classes. Now, both these classes extend a Moodle form class. The Moodle form class is the main class in Moodle that generates forms. In the constructor for this class, it calls a function called definition that must be overridden by the child class. So this is where we come in. This is where we create the forms, for the form for searching and the form for adding a note. The object, now it's not actually necessary here. As of PHP 5, everything is passed as a reference. I've just put the @ sign there just to, actually I probably could have left it, but I was just following some of the examples on the other Moodle forms. But again, this isn't really necessary. The underscore form object is created in the constructor in the Moodle form class. So we basically just want to have an object that associates with that, and then we're going to start manipulating that object. So we're just going to call our object mForm, and we're just going to this is a reference to the form that has already been generated in that class. In this one, you'll see there's a difference in the notes create note class. This one is, hi Sarah, there's actually two forms here, one for searching and one for updating the note. I've just put them into the same PHP file. They're just different classes. This one here, you'll see this one has a new function that isn't declared in the other one. This one is for validation. Yes, that's correct, Richard. We're going to perform, in this create one, we're actually going to be doing editing and create. I'll be going on to that later, but basically, with Moodle, we'll be passing the data that is in the database back to this form. So this form will be pre-populated with any fields that are in the database. So the user, when they go to edit it, they will actually just get the create form that have the data that they've already entered previously. It will retrieve that. This validation function, here you can write anything you want. You may not want this form to be submitted for various reasons. In this, we're just going to make sure that the note that the user is writing is not empty. So that's just a simple, Moodle actually has its own, you can actually add your own rule to that, which I will go in later, but I'm going to show it both ways, just to show how validation works and how Moodle also has some custom methods to add your own rules. So, and they've also got ones, the ones that I know you can add to make sure it's not empty, to make sure it's it's an email. I forget what the other ones are, but there's some pre-built validation within Moodle. Actually, the parent validation is actually just returns an empty array. So you could here just have errors equals array. So all the validation should actually take place in here. How we avoid injection attacks is actually done in the definition class, which I will show you later on when we start defining what elements we are going to be adding. So if you go to the lib form in your Moodle directory, it contains a list of elements that you can add. Here you'll see that we have a button, cancel, a checkbox, a date selector. Now simply all these have their own rules and their own constructor or their own class that defines how they behave. So how do they behave on submission, and how are they pre-populated? For example, the date selector, that contains a day, a month, and a year. But in the database, it saves it as a Unix time. So this class goes and converts the Unix time to a date so that it can be displayed in the day, month, year drop-down boxes. And then when it's saved, then save it as that integer. You can go and look at that further. There's more of them there, but we'll just be using some of the really basic ones for this example. Alright, so here's setting the type and add-in rules. Alright, so here we're going to start creating the search. Here I've just used a simple Moodle API function that I quickly looked for to retrieve courses for the current user that's logged in. This function was able to take a list of parameters, one of them being what columns did I want returned. So in this case, all I want is the ID and short name for the course. Now, however, this does not return it in a format that I can simply pass to this select element here. So this is where I go through and create an array. So once I have these courses, actually returns an array of objects. Each object is the course and the value of these columns that is returned. So I just want to go through and create an array where the key is the course ID and what is displayed is the course short name. As you can see, I've simply looped through here, made the key the ID of the course, and what is displayed the short name. Now we can add this to the Moodle select element. Here I've created a group. Groups allow you to put multiple elements on the same line. So instead of having the elements one above each other, here I've gone to have basically the course and then the submit button next to it. I'll show you this in the next picture. So I'll just go through. So the group, that's just an array. Here, I'm going to be creating an element. This element, here, the create element, we're going to select what type of element are we going to be using. In this case, it's a select element. This is just your standard one that you would use just when you're creating HTML, just where you have a select and a drop down and a bunch of options that you can choose. Behind the scenes, we're going to be calling this course. So when the data is submitted, our form is going to retrieve, this value is going to be passed as course. This is the value that we are going to, the label for this. And this is the array that we have just created here that populates this select box. Again, this array is simply the key with the ID and what is shown. The submit, this is basically, or as the self-explanatory, just the submit button. This is what makes it go. This is how you indicate that you want the form to submit the data and to be processed. Here we're going to just call it search. Here I've defined a new string in our language file. I'm not going to go back and forth between the language file and show every time I add a string from now on, but if you just go back and look at those examples, you simply just create another string index for that string array, and then you can call that whatever you want. Now we're going to add the element group. Each element has a different list of attributes that it accepts. In this case, to find out what these are, if you go back to that lib form folder and you go to one of those PHP files, you can see that what the constructor accepts. In this case, we're going to pass the group name, the label for the group, what elements are a part of the group. In this case, it is just this array that we've created here. This is the separator of the elements. This is what's going to separate the select box and the submit box. At the moment, it's just going to be a space. This value here represents, this is actually by default set as true. I found this kind of annoying, so I actually changed it to false. What this does is this prepends the group name to every element that you submit. So rather than retrieving the element course, you actually need to go through course group course. I'm sure there's benefits to that. I'm just not aware of them. Now here you're asking about SQL injections. In this example, this array is going to be generated by Moodle itself. So it's, unless someone was to go through and actually edit the HTML that the form is submitted, there's a rare chance that anything besides an integer will be submitted. But in this case, we're just going to, just to be careful, we'll define that. So we're going to set the type of this course to param int. There are many parameters that you can use. The param text, param alpha, param numeric, and param int. Each of them, if you look on the Moodle site, actually has a definition on how they are used and how they filter them out. But this just means that it goes through a filtering process. On submission, if someone tries to submit something that's not an integer, it's going to be filtered through. Alright, here's an issue. Now, if someone accessed this plugin that we've created, but they're not enrolled in any courses, they're going to see a drop-down box with an empty array. With an empty value in the select box. So instead of doing that, we should first, in the logic, figure out if there are courses for that user. If there are, we can pass those courses to the form. So we can take the logic out of the form, the logic being this here that generates the courses, and we can actually pass that to the form. So we can avoid the logic being done twice. If there are no courses, maybe we'll just display a message instead of displaying an empty select box. So how are we going to do this? I've taken the logic out of the form and put it within the notes.php file. Now here you will see This is the function, that the Moodle API function that I was using to return the courses. But now I've put it here, and I'm going to assign it this value here. Now, I've said if this is not true, or this is not a value, because this function will return false if nothing is found. So if not false will be if true. We are just going to simply display a header, and then a string. Well, we're going to display a box. This box is just going to be a div with the string that we have defined in our language string local course notes, with the class general box and the ID notice. Then we're going to create the Moodle footer, and then we're going to exit. Otherwise, we're going to go through, put those through to the array, and then pass those to the course. Pass those to the form, sorry. You'll see here that the second option of this class here is an array of values. In this case, this Moodle allows you to pass data to the form. We are just going to, this can be an array, so each index represents the name of the data that we're going to pass through. So we're going to pass through one called user courses, and we're going to assign that the courses array. Now, what does that mean about the notes underscore forms? Well, we've got rid of the logic, and we simply placed this here. If you explore the Moodle form class in further depth, you will see that there is a custom data array that is populated. The constructor will be passed this value here, and then assign it into an object called custom data, well, an array. And here it is just everything will be called this, in this underscore custom data, and then just the name that we have called it here. We have called it previously. So this, and that is how we called it here. Now what happens when we view it and we're not in the course? Course is not available. And if there are, we're going to get a drop down. That works. Alright, see you, Michael. Alright, so now we'll go through handling form submission. Now, the first form, you will see here, these are the forms that we declared earlier in the notes.php class. This function here, getData, is called on all the different forms. This is, you can actually call this multiple times on multiple forms on the same page, and Moodle will know which form that you were talking about, because every value that is prepended to every value that is submitted. So if you just hang on, the alarm is going in the office. Hey Dom, can you get that? So yeah, all the values that are submitted are pre-appended with the value of the form, so an identifier. So we will know when this form is submitted or when another form is submitted. So if you look back on this page here, you will notice we have getData twice. So this is when the search form is submitted, this is when the notes form is submitted. So when the search form is submitted, we're simply going to redirect back to this page, but we're going to pass an ID in the URL. The ID is just going to be the value of the course. So this data here is assigned all the variables from the form. And in our form, we called a variable, the select box, we called an identifier course. So this is how we retrieve that course ID. What was submitted? Well, this is what was submitted. Now this, when you redirect, this is going to display the notes form. The notes form was only actually displayed if an ID was passed. So now that we've passed an ID, we're going to go forward and we're going to start generating that. Here, again, this is just another element in the libs form library called text area. We're going to assign that with the value note. Again, this is the variable name. So this is what will be passed when the form is submitted. So we will be able to retrieve the data using data arrow note. This is just a string that we've created in our language file. The type is going to be param text. Again, this will stop SQL injections, so people won't be able to put any JavaScript or anything like that because of the rules that are in place for the param_text type. Now, we're going to add a rule. This rule is, Moodle comes with predefined rules. This rule, we specify that we want to apply this rule to the note. This is the message that will be displayed when this rule is met, and the rule here is that it's required. So the required, as the name suggests, the field cannot be empty. So this string will be displayed on that field if nothing is ever filled in. The same thing can be done in the validation function. If the validation function, it will take in the data and the files. In our case, we're not submitting any files, so the data is the only object we need to worry about. The data object, or the data array, is simply an array of the variables that we declared in the form. In this case, we declared the note. So if the note is empty, we are going to create the index notes in the errors array, and then we're going to assign it a string that I've created in the local course notes file. So this will go through, check if this is empty. If it is, it's going to create index in the errors array and then assign that a string. And then the validation form will return this array, and then Moodle will be able to go through and check if any of those indexes we created match any of the elements that we also created in the form. Alright, so now we're nearly finished. Now we want to go about saving the note. Now, when the note is submitted, we want to check to see if this note already exists for the user or not. In this case, we basically just do a check in this table that we created. We basically check for that user and that course, does a note exist? If it exists, we simply update the note value with what was retrieved from the form and then called update record in the Moodle database. Else, if it wasn't found, then it's going to be a new entry into the database. So here is where we create the class and the different columns that will be added. So this is the user ID column, the course ID column, and the note column. The user ID column simply uses the user object that is a global object throughout Moodle that stores the user variables. The course ID is the ID that's passed to this script, which we've already done checks previously to ensure that this is a valid course. And the next one is the note. This is what we have just submitted from the form. In this case, we're going to insert the record. Now we want to pre-populate it. This is what you would, someone mentioned earlier. How do we pre-populate? If they've already created their note, then we want to make sure that they're not just going to keep recreating the same note with new data. We want to make sure we're showing them what the results they had earlier. So you'll see here we have the set data function. Here we will simply check. Here it does two things. If the form has been submitted, then we want to, before the form is displayed in the page, we are going to set the data for this note to these variables that were declared earlier on submission of the form. So the note that we have newly added will be passed here, and that will be the new record that is displayed. If we are just visiting the page, and we have only passed an ID of the course, then we want to check if there's any data associated with that user ID and that course in the course notes. So we basically check if that record exists. If it does, we use set data. Alright, so here's where the upgrading comes into effect. Here's the issue. We've given our plugin to multiple people already and then realized that we wanted to record the time created and the time modified for that plugin. For every time an entry is created, we want to create the time created, and every time it's modified, update the time modified column. So here's where we create a new file. I know this all sounds pretty confusing, and I'm kind of getting lost going through it at this pace. The code is available, so you can go through this again. I know it's kind of like a bore listening to it all throughout like this, but I'm going to, if you could just experiment with it on your site once you've got the code, then you can go through the code and maybe go through this presentation and just see how everything works. So we're going to create a dbupgrade.php file. This file here, now this file is responsible for upgrading newer releases of the plugin. So our scenario earlier, we forgot to create a time created and a time modified field. Now, as you guys may or may not know, the installer, or as I explained earlier, the install.xml file, that is the file that is responsible for generating the database and the fields. However, this is only called when the plugin is initially installed. If a user has already installed the plugin, then they've already got that course notes table that we created. So how are we going to go and add the new columns? Because even if we give them the new code with the updated install.xml file, it's not going to trigger an update to update that table. We have to go through and create an upgrade.php file. That's the difference between the upgrade.php file and the install.xml file. When you first install the plugin, you will retrieve the database content that is from the install.xml file. The database upgrade.php file just handles any upgrades further on down the track. Now, to trigger an upgrade, it's as simple as going to the plugin's version.php file and incrementing that number. You'll see that number before was 2012-05-28-01, which was the 28th of the 5th, 2012. We have just increased that 01 to 02. Now, if you visit your Moodle site and go to the notifications page, you will see an automatic Moodle recognizes that the file has been generated. It compares the version number defined in this file with what is recorded in the database. And then it realizes, hey, we have to go through an upgrade. So this is when it triggers this screen. And you can see upgrade to be, this is where we go through the upgrade process and we can continue. This is the script. Now we've updated, as you see, that's the number that we updated our version to. So just try and remember that number. That's the number we're going to be using in the upgrade.php file. All this here is standard throughout all the upgrade scripts. You can simply just, these 4 lines, basically you can copy from most of them. This contains all the functions that you'll be using throughout when you're performing upgrades. These are the global variables that you will be using. This is the value result that will be returned at the end of the upgrade. And this is just the database manager. This handles adding a table. So this is the database abstract. So if the database is a MySQL or SQL Server, you don't have to worry about that. This will handle adding the tables for all those types. Now, if you'll notice the function name here, in this case, we have to create a function. When upgrading a local plugin, Moodle will go through and it will look for a function in the upgrade.php script with this name. It's with the prefix XMLDB, the name of our plugin, _upgrade, and then the version. Moodle will pass in the version. Moodle will pass the version that is stored in the database here. Now, here we simply do a check. If the older version is less than, this is the value we've increased it to, remember? So before it was 01, we've increased it to 02. So it's going to enter this if statement. What are we going to do? We have to do something now. So this is where we start defining the instructions. This looks a bit complex and messy, but if you go to the other modules that are in Moodle, you'll see that a lot of them follow this standard. Well, they all follow this standard of creating tables and adding fields. So you just need to get used to the syntax. I don't expect you guys to straight away, me just saying define new XMLDB underscore table and field, and to know that straight away. But again, this is something that you have to go through and just compare with other modules. So here, the table. This is the table we're going to edit. So this may seem confusing that the new here, that's just creating a new class. This table already exists. So this is the table that we want to edit, and this is the one that was created in the install.xml file for people that installed this earlier. So people who installed this earlier won't have the time created or time modified and values in them. So here we define a new field. It's the time created field. This is an integer of length 10, unsigned. I've honestly forgotten what the null here were. This refers to the field that was declared previously, and as you can see, we've created a new one. So the previous one here is going to be time created. Here's the function to add them. You simply add the fields you pass the table and the new field we want to add. Pass the table and the new field we want to add. And here is simply the upgrade save point. So once that's finished, this will just update the version that is stored in the Moodle database to this value that is recorded here. So we will know, the Moodle will know that the upgrade has gone successful, and every time it hits this upgrade.php script, it will know that it can miss this whole if statement because its version is not less than that version that is defined here. Finally, this is just updating the code. This is quickly. With the time modified, we simply, every time, if the note does exist, we simply, then it's already been created, so now we just modify the time. If it hasn't, then we pass the time created and time modified and insert it. This code applies. This is the code that is the new updated module, so everyone will be having this code. The old records, yes, will be null. You could write in the upgrade script. So if the values get null, the upgrade script you can actually write what you want to. So if you wanted to make the values of the old ones the current time, you could, or you can make them 0. You can do what you want. However, it's going to be impossible for you to know when they were added because you never actually recorded the time. So in this case, I just left them as null. Okay, so that's the end. Hopefully that's a whole lot clearer now. Hence the foggy picture where you can't actually see anything, which is, I imagine, how you're all feeling right now. And just a note, the install.xml file will also have to be updated with the time created and time modified. As this, remember, the install.xml file is used on the first installation and upgrades are done thereafter. Are there any questions? I'm sure there are. I'll just go through and read some of the comments. Yep, I'm glad, Richard, that this was exactly what you're after, a confusing talk with no real direction and a bit all over the place. I'm glad I've filled in those criteria. Alright, that's good to hear, Gareth. I realized when I was doing the presentation today that this would really be aimed at a specific group of people, and I was hoping that the room would not fill up with people expecting something just scraping what a plugin was and just demonstrating how a plugin worked. I wanted to actually get into the actual gritty of it and show you what happened behind the scenes. Again, it's hard to do through a presentation. as this when you're not in person, and it's easier when you're writing the code. However, I chose to take it this direction because if I was to write the code during the presentation, most of the time would be spent debugging and finding syntax errors, and wouldn't really make any progress. I will now actually show you this plugin working. I've got it actually installed on my test site. If you just bear with me, I'll just share. Alright, so this is just my test site. I'll just log in as a student. Here you can see this is the menu item that we've created, the course notes, and this is the link. So let's click on that. These are the different courses that were pre-populated by the form. Now we want to, what note have we put for the course 102? Let's do a search. You'll notice here that the URL has added the ID to it. Now if you remember the logic in the notes.php file, we were to display the notes form when an ID was passed. Of course you can style this form. This is pretty bland looking at the moment, but this just gives you an idea of how a database interactions. So we want to add a note. Hi there. So that's probably not a really descriptive message for a course, but I'll just put that there now. There we go. There's our course. Now this one doesn't have one. Now let's go back and see if that is pre-populated. Or fingers crossed. There we go. So we have got the note there that is stored. Alright, so that's basically how the plugin works. Yes, it's very basic, but once you get an idea of how plugins interact with the Moodle database and how capabilities work, then you can make plugins that are really quite powerful. Now you see with this plugin here, we could start writing reports on this. So see what students, you could write another plugin that reads from the table that you just created, and just see what students think about certain courses. This is basically just data collection that you're doing right now. So yeah, it may look basic, but it leads up to something that can be quite powerful. So I think that's about it. If there aren't any more questions, alright, Dom's informed me that there's a database question, so I'll just try to look for that. Maybe I'll just ask him. Dom, where's the database question? Alright, yep, so Dom's asked, what if you retrieve a specification with a list of tables that need to be created? Unfortunately, there's no easy way to do that for plugins. You still have to go through the XMLDB editor. There's no simple SQL where you can just import an SQL query. Actually, don't quote me on that. They might have added that to that. Maybe that is, there's an ability to do that. Actually, that does sound logical, so I wouldn't be surprised if there was. So, but so I completely reworded my answer, gone from no to yes. But yeah, basically most of the interaction for the database tables has to go through the XMLDB editor. That's true, Gareth. Most SQL dumps are pretty stringent with how things are declared. And they're all pretty compliant, so I'm sure I haven't looked at the code behind Moodle and how it would take an SQL dump and convert that to an XML file, but I'm sure it's in most cases it would probably do that well. Yes, I'll be putting the code in the iMoot course. It's actually on my GitHub repository, so I'll simply put a link to that there. I'll also upload this presentation for you guys to go through again. So I think, have I missed any questions? Nope. Alright, looks all good. Alright, so thank you all for bearing with me during that presentation. I hope it wasn't too painful for you. And I hope you learnt something from it.
Right, thank you, Mark. Just got to turn his PC off. Yeah, and we'll have all this session up recorded and whatnot. We'll inform you in the forums when that's all available. So if you want to, you can go through that in your leisure and enjoy it. And thank you again, Mark, for participating in the iMoot this year.